Welcome back. We are going to investigate today the secrets to negotiation that the books don't mention. And these secrets are from a practical point of view. Everything we're sharing on this program is from a practical point of view. So let's make a start. Today's session is all about getting ready to get ready. We're going to review what are the type of preconditions you need to consider before you get into any type of negotiation. What are the types of preconditions that you need to consider before we actually engage in any type of negotiation? So let's go back into the 360-degree pro model. If you remember that, that's what we're going to equip you with. A pro model. And remember, professionals get paid and amateurs don't. We look at the model and we've got the red, amber, green model. The area that's red, that's telling you that the moment that you get involved in any type of negotiation, if you've not considered those concepts and principles, you are actually on stop. You're not in any fit shape to agree anything. If we look at the amber zone, that's when we're actually in play. We're getting ready to put the thing in gear. That's what we're doing. Green, when we're at that point, that's when we've got enough information, enough, if you like, preconditions solved, preconditions analyzed, so we can actually agree something. So we've got our red, amber, green pro model. Now we've had a look at the pro model. The next consideration is context, because whatever negotiation model you engaged with, the context that you use it is the major consideration. And what we're going to do in this program is give you a number of contexts that you need to look at when deciding your negotiation process. So let's have a look at it, because the 360-degree model, if you like, that's going to give you the DNA of how you potentially can behave in the negotiation environment. So our model will give you that. But the moment that DNA comes into contact with something else, it will alter what you have to do. What we're going to do in this program is give you the pro considerations that pro negotiators, whether in sales or procurement, look at before they actually start to make a decision of how do we need to negotiate. So let's have a look at the first one. Let's have a look at it. And this is a big question here. Are there more than two parties? Just think about that. Are there more than two parties? You see, if there are two parties, essentially you're working with someone talking and someone listening, and someone responding and someone putting in some kind of counter response. So are there more than two parties involved? If there are more than two parties, it makes it a very different type of negotiation. If there are more than two parties, so three or more parties, we call that a coalition environment. And let me explain how that might feel, just to give you the flavour. Now, it needn't be you versus two people. You might look at it and think, well, okay, I'm in a meeting and I'm talking to the sales director, and the sales director is sat with his finance director. So quite obviously, they're going to form a coalition against me. Well, that might not be so. It could be that the sales director's actually got his own financial budget and actually wants to spend it the way he or she sees fit, and actually will form a coalition with you to make sure the money is spent the way that they see it, and doesn't actually see the finance director as a potential coalition partner. Now, this might not always be true, and sometimes people can bring in another party into the negotiation, and quite often that plays into a concept called good cop, bad cop, and we're going to talk about how to counter that. But the moment you've got more than two people involved, it changes. It changes what you need to do. So let's have a look at what else can come out of that. So the first consideration is it more than two parties? And taking it into a more sophisticated consideration, we have something called the two-person game versus the many-person game. And where I'm going with that is, when you have two companies that are negotiating, it's not actually just the two parties. There are negotiations taking place within each side. And what I mean by that is, you could have two parties. So for example, there could be a property developer looking to develop a piece of land, and a protest group forms. But within that protest group, there's actually a bigger game taking place. That protest group could be made up of a party that genuinely is concerned at all costs about the damage to the environment that this piece of development delivers. So they're going to negotiate purely on the basis of that. There's another group within that group who are very concerned about the environment, but have a point of view that if the developer can show some evidence that they will respect the state of the environment, they're prepared to trade. And within that group, there's another group that actually aren't so bothered about the impact on the environment, but are more bothered about the price the developer has to pay because they've got some form of stake in the piece of land. So they're not actually negotiating on the back of the damage to the environment. They're using that as some kind of method to leverage price. You have to look at it. Is this a two-person game or is it a many-person game? And are there subgroups within the two parties? And if you consider that, you can see that the negotiation model has to perform very, very differently if this is the landscape. So let's have a look at another consideration. And what we have here is the consideration that the parties are divided internally. Now, what do I mean about that? Well, do the negotiators have to negotiate internally? For example, you may be negotiating with the operations director of a business, but the operations director may have to negotiate with the finance director. He may have to do that. The operations director may have to negotiate with the health and safety officer. It doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to be divided over that, but the safety officer and the finance director may be divided on some issues. If we take it further, you will have people in a party that may be on the same side, but their value structure is different. Some people may be looking for a short-term relationship. There may be people on the other side that are looking for a long-term relationship. There may be people on one side that have a very robust point of view on how to negotiate, and you may have people on the other side whose values are to negotiate strategically, which means that the relationship does matter. So again, if you look at the 360-degree pro model, it performs differently if the parties that are negotiating are potentially divided or have some divisions there. And then we look at, are the parties divided by diverse views? Now, sometimes having diverse views in an opposing party, it can help, because the more diverse the views are, you're probably going to be able to build some kind of stakeholder group across those diverse views. But on the other hand, if the opposing party has this diversity, that can actually hinder the negotiation because you're having to accommodate multiple views. And that's difficult in any type of negotiation. Are the parties internally divided? And think about that, and think about what might that division be. So that's the reflection on opposing parties being divided. We then have the consideration, is this negotiation likely to be repetitive? And what I mean by that is, there's a difference between one-time transactions and multiple transactions. So for example, typically a house sale, it's a one-time transaction. The negotiation style accommodates that. There are going to be certain things that aren't a consideration when you sell a house. It's a one-time transaction. When you sell a car, it's a one-time transaction on the basis that you're not a dealership. You're probably going to never meet that person again on any kind of level. So you can negotiate in quite a robust manner, and it really doesn't matter because it's not going to happen again. But if we can then consider, is it repetitive? Because if it's a short run perspective, which means a one-off transaction, whether both parties completely see the same thing differently, it really doesn't matter. However, if we're looking at something which requires a longer term perspective, then the way we behave in each negotiation sets the play for how each negotiation takes place. So if, for example, every single negotiation is dictated by a heavy session of bargaining, well, that's going to actually set the play for every single negotiation. If that's what you want and that's the right thing to do, then do it. If it's not the right thing to do, then you need to consider that one-time behavior in repetitive negotiation means that behavior is expected across all the negotiations. And you just need to think about, what kind of legacy am I looking to leave in this negotiation? Because where we go next, repetitive bargaining needs a consideration about reputation. Let me tell you what I mean. If you're happy that your reputation is to be a very, very tough negotiator, then that's fine. But that reputation of being a very, very tough negotiator, that goes into every single meeting that you will have. And you need to consider, is that the legacy of what you want? It might be, it might not be what you want. Whereas it may be a consideration that if you're going to consistently transact with this other party, maybe you need a reputation for fairness. Maybe you don't. But either way, if it's not considered, what takes place in a negotiation remains as part of the DNA for future negotiations. And when we look at the 360-degree Pro model, this will give you some ideas on how to position your negotiation style. The next consideration. So we've just considered the concept of repetition, and then the next area is linkage. Now, linkage effects, this is a big one. If you can get your head around linkage effects, it will make you far more effective as a negotiator. So, first question is, are there issues that can be linked? You see, in most negotiations and many deadlock on price, that usually the price is linked to something else. The price can be linked to the quality. The price can be linked to the volume. The price can be linked to the service level agreement. The price can be linked to credit terms. The price can be linked to future transactions. Are there issues that can be linked? And we will be exploring how to make that work, whether you're a buyer or a seller. It's not relevant, but the ability to explore links is one of the key skills that a pro negotiator has. Second consideration is, are future negotiations linked? They usually are, which is why this plays out of thinking about your reputation management going into the next negotiation. So linkage effects, we're going to explore that, and it's an area that will actually give you a tremendous advantage. And then we consider, all right, there's linkage. What about if there's more than one issue? Now, again, if we're selling a house or a car, there's usually one issue that pervades everything else, which is the price, the money, the volume of the money, which is fair enough. However, usually there's more than one issue. For example, a labour dispute may be around about wage levels, but underneath that, there's probably terms and conditions and contractual obligations, the number of hours worked, all kinds of things that are part of that issue. And usually, when you get into some kind of conflict in a negotiation, that conflict could be about the price. It could be about the price. There's usually trade-offs. that you can discuss and link to the one issue. And this is where an amateur negotiator can be turned into a pro, because it's not all about the price, and that's whether you're a buyer or a seller. So we'll be exploring value trade-offs, and it's a major consideration before we get into the pro model. Okay, so we're looking there at value trade-offs. The next consideration, do we have to agree? Is it crucial that we agree? For example, if it's a house sale or a car sale, no, it's not necessary that we agree. No, it's not. We can disagree, and we can take our house or car to the next buyer, and they can take their money to the next seller. So it's not necessary. But, for example, a labor dispute, yeah, we have to find an agreement. We have to get to a point where there's some kind of agreement. Now, this can happen with an existing relationship. It may be there's part of that relationship that the negotiation has got into a deadlock, but the relationship still has to exist. And if that's the case, then our pro-negotiation model has to perform to find that resolution, even if there isn't one that jumps out at us, because what we have to consider is a concept to BATNA, an acronym in the negotiation industry, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. What are the alternatives? And we can use the pro model to work out what are their best alternatives and what are our best alternatives. And once we have that, we then back into trade-off. This is a technique. It's a technique, it's just a process, it's a skill. It doesn't require quick wits, it just requires preparation and understanding the tools at your disposal, which we're going to give you. We're going to give you those tools. And one of the tools that we're going to give you is to explore what is your rock bottom position. If it looks like checkmate, what does that mean? So, the next area is this. You're negotiating with someone. Does it need to be ratified? Does it need to be approved by someone else? For example, you may be sitting directly with the managing director, and the managing director has agreed the deal is done, but he says to you, I have to take this deal to my team. I have to take it to my team. So you need to think in terms of, does my negotiation process accommodate the fact that this agreement may need some kind of approval? Does it do that? Will it do that? It could be a group has to confirm it. A group that will never meet you have to confirm that this is the right thing to do. Does your negotiation strategy play into that environment? We then think about threats. Is it possible in this negotiation that there are threats that can be made by either party? Threats can be deadlines, finite budgets. Threats can be quality standards that have to be adhered to, third party that's against the deal. So when we're looking at that pro model, will it help us work around the fact that there may be threats made to the deal no matter how we perform? What you might consider as a threat is time, because the negotiation that you're about to enter, other time boundaries attached to it. Those time boundaries can come from either side. It could be that you've got time constraints. It could be that whatever it is that you're offering or whatever it is that you're trying to do is time constrained on your side. It could be it's time constrained in some way on the other side. And before you go into a negotiation, it's a big question, time. And the reason time is a big question is time usually equates to money. For example, you could be in a negotiation where there's yourself and possibly 3 people on the other side. And there's a cost related to those 3 people continually getting together to negotiate this with you. There are going to be other costs. It could be the more lengthy the negotiation, the costs escalate, not just because of the time the negotiators are putting into it. It could be that the deal is becoming more complicated than it needs to be. We then move on to the question about contracts. You're in a negotiation, Is the outcome going to be a binding contract? Is that what the outcome's going to be? Because sometimes that can be valuable. Sometimes it can be valuable to one party and not the other. Sometimes it's not valuable to one party, or sometimes it's not valuable to either party. So we need to think about, in a negotiation, is the outcome that we're looking for a binding contract? Because if the contract is binding, that affects how we perform. Is the contract binding by a legal framework? Is the contract binded by some kind of previous contract? Is the contract based on some kind of external measurement? Is that accurate? Is that fair? Is it correct? Is that what the negotiation needs? These are all considerations. Our next point is very important. Are these negotiations to remain private? Are they private? Are the outcomes private? Are the outcomes locked down? Are the reasons why we want them to be private? Are the reasons why the other party would want them to be private? Is it useful if the negotiations remain private? Are there reasons why we wouldn't want them to be private? Because the opposite effect of that is, are these negotiations in public? Are the outputs going to be public? Is it valuable that the outputs are public? Is it disadvantageous if the outputs are public? Does this have any bearing on what we decide to do? It is a consideration, because you can think in terms of, if this information was in the public domain, does it benefit anybody? Does it benefit either party? Is that something that should be part of this negotiation? It's all a consideration. And then, what we have here is something weird and wonderful, I think. It's, what are the norms? When I say what are the norms, what would be normal for a negotiation like this? What would be the normal responses on either party for a negotiation of this type? Are there any norms that we can identify? Are there any norms we can model against? Are there any norms that we should be familiar with? Are there any norms that we should focus on for either party? But what is recognized as being normal for this type of negotiation? And then, if we've moved on from what does it look like on an individual basis, are there any group norms that we should be familiar with, or consider, or be aware of? If you look at an adversarial approach to negotiation, are there any norms on the other side where it's clear that some people are part of the group and some people aren't? And does that have any impact or potential impact on what can be agreed and is not agreed? Considering what is normal individually and what is normal for a group, in terms of our 360-degree pro model, if you can get your head around this and put some time out to consider it, it's really going to give you a professional advantage when you get down to going from the amber zone of the model to the green zone. And then we think about this. Is it possible, after everything that's been agreed, that a third party can intervene? Now, that third party can be from either side, or it can be an external third party, which might be legislation, it might be a trade union, it might be a competitor, it might be some kind of external pricing structure, some kind of external legal agreement, it could be from a shareholder. Is it possible that a third party could intervene in this negotiation? And if it is possible, what might be the outcome? And is it something that you should prepare? So we've got quite a lot of what I would define as characteristics that affect the DNA of the material that we're sharing with you. And if you don't get ready to get ready, this material will not define you as a professional negotiator. Now, we're going to be sending out to you a questionnaire, and that questionnaire is a prompt, because you can use that questionnaire as a reference point to how it might impact on your opening position and your closing position. And you can use it to look at, well, how does that alter their position? And when you listen to the rest of this program, you're listening with this context. And what we've found is, if you look at the considerations and you use the SWOT analysis sheet that we're going to send out to you, you can look at every point. Is this a strength or a weakness from my point of view? Is there an opportunity or a threat from my point of view? And then play it back. From their point of view, is this situation a strength or a weakness? And from their point of view, is it an opportunity or a threat? By adopting these practical methods, you will surely find that your performance in a negotiation is improved considerably. So to wrap up this packed session, let's recap where we started from. YouGov did an analysis of UK business, and based on that analysis, the suggestion was that the average UK business could increase its profitability by 7% per annum. 7%. Not increase its sales, increase its profitability by 7%. And to do that, we're looking at how business spends its money and sells its products. A business with a turnover of £50,000 has a potential of an extra 7% of profit, which is £3,500 per annum. The program that you've engaged with retails at £69 a month, and in terms of lifetime improvements, you should expect a 500% return on investment on your investment in this course. That's your expectation based on your investment in this course. So based on that, let's have a look at the actions that you should consider. What I need you to do, what we need you to do, what you need you to do is this. Perform a SWOT diagnostic with the material that we've sent you on each of the points that we've raised from your point of view. Start getting a real grip on your point of view so that when you go into a negotiation, you're fully equipped from your point of view. The next class, we're going to focus on the 360-degree model, and what we're looking at is two of the foundations. It's how people perform in a negotiation. So we're going to look around the strategy of people, and we're going to look at the strategy of power. How we use power and how people use power. And finally, thanks for listening. And remember, professionals get paid, amateurs don't. So practice is vital in the art of negotiation. And Gary Player, the successful South African golfer, he always said, the more I practice, the luckier I get. The more I practice, the luckier I get. I'll see you next time.